As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So on Saturday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he told Secretary of State Antony Blinken that the brutal campaign in Gaza that has killed nearly 24,000 Palestinians is not only an Israeli war, but also an American one. Netanyahu said, quote, "This is not just our war, it is also your war. This is the war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness," end quote. So you talk about the rhetoric that you see from Israeli officials, the sons of light against the sons of darkness. And Netanyahu said, he told Blinken this when Blinken visited Israel last week. Netanyahu also said, quote, "This is a war against the axis of evil led by Iran and its three proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis," end quote. So from the perspective of the Palestinians and many Arabs across the region, the slaughter in Gaza certainly is an American war. All you have to do is look at all of the support that the U.S. has given Israel to do this, all the military aid, the political cover, vetoing the resolutions at the UN Security Council, coming out against the genocide hearing at the ICJ, all this stuff that they see that. And this is part of the reason why I'm so opposed to the U.S. being involved in this and other wars and other conflicts as well, is because, they're making enemies of people, that they view this as an American war. And the U.S. has now also intervened directly on behalf of Israel to bomb the Houthis in Yemen, who started attacking Israeli-linked commercial shipping in protest of what's happening in Gaza. And now the U.S. has escalated that situation by bombing Yemen. The militias in Iraq and Syria have been attacking the U.S. It's kind of for two reasons. One, they want the U.S. to get out, so they're probably taking advantage of the regional tensions. But also, they did start those attacks in response to U.S. support for what's happening in Gaza. And during that 7-day truce, when they were exchanging hostages, the attack stopped. I believe there was just one rocket fired at a U.S. base in that time. But then they started again when Israel restarted everything. So U.S. officials have acknowledged to the New York Times that U.S. and British airstrikes launched across Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen did not significantly impact the Houthis' ability to launch attacks in the Red Sea. So the Pentagon said that the first wave of strikes that were launched early Friday morning, which I covered in the last show, targeted around 30 locations and destroyed 60 missile and drone sites. Early Saturday morning, the U.S. launched another strike on a radar facility that U.S. officials said was missed in the initial attack. So the U.S. bombed Yemen again early Saturday morning. So Lieutenant General Douglas Sims, he's the director of the U.S. military's Joint Staff. He claimed on Friday that the initial round of airstrikes were enough to stop the Houthis from launching a large drone and missile attack in the Red Sea, similar to the one that they launched early last week. If you remember, there's a big barrage of drones and missiles. But these U.S. officials speaking to the New York Times said that that was not the case. They said that these strikes only degraded about 20 to 30% of the Houthis' offensive capability, which seems pretty high to me, that one round of airstrikes could wipe out that much. They might be exaggerating that a little bit. They said that much of the Houthi weapons are mounted on mobile platforms that can be easily moved and hidden, and that finding targets was more difficult than anticipated since the U.S. has not been collecting much intelligence on the Houthis in recent years. So Gonzalo Lira, an American citizen who was jailed in Ukraine for his political views, has died in Ukrainian prison, and this was confirmed by the State Department on Saturday. Lira died on January 11th after a battle with pneumonia that he said was initially ignored by Ukrainian authorities. Lira's father, Gonzalo Lira Sr., first notified the media of his son's death on Friday and said that he had been pleading with the U.S. Embassy to intervene. So this is Lira Sr. in an email to the Gray Zone. He said, quote, "I cannot accept the way my son has died. He was tortured, extorted, incommunicado for 8 months and 11 days, and the U.S. Embassy did nothing to help my son," end quote. So the Gray Zone obtained a note that Lira Jr., so this is Gonzalo, that he recently wrote to his defense attorney that indicated he had pneumonia for months before being admitted into the hospital. He said, quote, "I have had double pneumonia in both lungs as well as pneumonia thorax and a very severe case of edema, which is swelling of the body. All this started in mid-October but was ignored by the prison. They only admitted I had pneumonia at a December 22nd hearing. I'm about to have a procedure to reduce the edema. I don't know if it's edema or edema, pressure in my lungs, which is causing me extreme shortness of breath to the point of passing out after minimal activity or even just talking for 2 minutes," end quote. So Lira was a popular YouTuber and political commentator based in the northeastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, and he gained prominence in the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I don't know if any of you might remember, there was videos of him just kind of walking around the streets in Ukraine, just kind of talking about the war, about Zelensky, and it got a lot of people's attention. It was very interesting seeing this American guy, because he's Chilean as well. He's American Chilean, but he was born in America, had an American accent, and that kind of got him popular when it came to commenting on the war in Ukraine. And so he was arrested by the Ukrainian Security Services, the SBU, in May 2023 for allegedly justifying the Russian invasion. So he was arrested for his speech, basically, for his political views. And the SBU also accused him of discrediting top Ukrainian officials. And these are the kind of laws that they passed to crack down on dissent. And this is a government, military, intelligence service completely propped up by the United States. And the Biden administration did nothing for him. Another piece of big news from the weekend was the elections in Taiwan. The ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is considered the more independence-leaning party, less friendly to Beijing, they've been in power for the past 8 years. They won, and the candidate was William Lai, Lai Ching-te. Lai is the current vice president, and he won. The DPP did lose the legislature, so it could be harder for them to pass laws and stuff. But it does kind of indicate that this is going to be sort of more of the same. You're going to have a government that wants closer ties with the U.S., that wants more support from the U.S., and isn't going to kind of try to ease tensions with China. So the U.S., Blinken congratulated Lai, and so did many other Western countries. So China is warning against outside interference, saying that they're sending a negative signal and promoting Taiwanese independence forces. And the U.S. is sending, a quote-unquote unofficial delegation to Taiwan of former senior officials. They did this in 2008 and 2000. They sent these delegations of former senior officials. And you say, like, the U.S. officials get asked about this delegation. And they say, oh, these are private citizens acting on their own behalf here. They don't have anything to do with us. But that's just not true at all.
On this episode, I'm going to do my best to correct the record on one of the biggest lies we've been ever told about the Constitution and war powers. And it generally goes a little bit like this. Thomas Jefferson went to war or used military force with the Barbary States or pirates without a declaration of war from Congress. In fact, he didn't even need Congress. So presidents today don't need their authorization either. And both left and right have been happy to promote this lie for decades and decades. And with that, they claim things like, well, the president can do pretty much anything for short periods of time is one example. Or limited conflicts don't qualify as war. They don't rise to the level as war, so they can drop some bombs or do whatever. So the whole thing is moot anyways. Or Congress has absolutely no say whatsoever once hostilities get started. I'm going to do a brief timeline with receipts to show what went down, how Jefferson dealt with things, and you'll see that the mainstream lie is absolutely, well, just that, a lie. Jefferson talked about this in December of 1801 in his first annual message to Congress. And he points out that, we're at peace with everyone, and this is awesome, except for one situation. He said, to this state of general peace with which we have been blessed, only one exception exists, Tripoli. The least considerable of the Barbary states. Again, he just kind of points out that these people are not militarily strong. We can deal with them. I just need your approval to do that. I'll get to that in a moment. This is the least considerable of the Barbary states. They had come forward with demands unfounded either in right or in compact, and had permitted itself to denounce war on our failure to comply before a given day. The style of the demand admitted but one answer. Jefferson took a very strong, hard line on this, but again, you can take a hard line and follow the Constitution at the same time. He said, I sent a small squadron of frigates into the Mediterranean with assurances that the power of our sincere desire to remain in peace, but with orders to protect our commerce against the threatened attack. The measure was seasonable and salutary. The Bey had already declared war. So he finds out in all this time, they already declared war. We tried. They had already declared war. They sent cruisers out. 2 arrived at Gibraltar. Our commerce in the Mediterranean was blockaded, and that of the Atlantic in peril. So they were already blockading. They were going after ships. They were being very aggressive, demanding money. And Jefferson still went with this view. He noted that despite the attacks and the declaration of war against the United States, he was still, quote, unauthorized by the Constitution, without the sanction of Congress, to go beyond the line of defense. He said the vessel, again, this was Lieutenant Sterrett's vessel, the vessel, being disabled from committing further hostilities, was liberated with its crew. So you just remove its guns, and maybe it takes a long time to rearm it at that point, but basically saying this is the line of defense. But then, what does he do? he asked Congress for permission to go further. He wanted to deal with this. He wanted to be able to go into the harbors. He wanted to be able to seize ships, whatever needed to be done to put an end to this. And he knew that even though they were being attacked, even though there was a declaration of war, according to his reading of the Constitution, according to Levi Lincoln, according to the temporary or the acting Secretary of the Navy, James Madison, Albert Gallatin, no one felt that they could actually just go into Tripoli and raid until Congress approved it. And here's how Jefferson requested it on December 8th, 1801. The legislature will doubtless consider whether, by authorizing measures of offense also, they will place our force on an equal footing with that of its adversaries. I communicate all material information on this subject, that in the exercise of this important function confided by the Constitution to the legislature exclusively, their judgment may form itself on a knowledge and consideration of every circumstances of weight. So TLDR, this is Jefferson saying, even though we've been attacked, even though they've declared war on us, we still, because we have not authorized anything beyond fighting them off at the strict line of defense, if you want me, if you agree with me, I think we need to go in there. But if you agree with me, because this is exclusively your decision to make, I'm going to go in and get it done. And that's exactly what they did. So this was December 8th, 1801. He asked for permission to go on the offense. And on February 6th, 1802, Congress gives him that permission. They passed a law called the Protection of the an Act for the Protection of the Commerce and Seamen of the United States against the Tripolitan cruisers, specifically authorizing him to deal with just that. Not whomever he decided might be a problem, but specifically against these cruisers, because this is who he told them that we were having problems with. And here from the legislation, this is February 6th, 1802. Again, this will be linked to in the show notes as well, so you can read it as well. It shall be lawful fully to equip, officer, man, and employ such of the armed vessels of the United States as may be judged requisite by the President of the United States for protecting effectually the commerce and seamen thereof on the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean, and adjoining seas. Again, this is specifically directed towards Tripoli only. He said, and it be further, this is from Congress, signed by Thomas Jefferson, February 6th, 1802, be it further enacted, it shall be lawful for the President of the United States to, literally, they're basically, Congress is having to say it's lawful for the president to conduct them to basically respond with offensive measures after being attacked. It shall be lawful for the President of the United States to instruct the commanders of the respective public vessels aforesaid to subdue, seize, and make prize of all vessels, goods, and effects belonging to the Bay of Tripoli or to his subjects, and to bring or send the same into port to be proceeded against and distributed according to the law, and also to cause to be done all such other acts of precaution or hostility as the state of war will justify and may, in his opinion, require. So, look, this is very, 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 very much limited to Congress giving instruction to what the executive branch could do. Jefferson didn't complain about this. He literally asked for them to support this. So ultimately, when you get down to it, there's much more to the story that goes on in the next couple of years, but ultimately, when you get down to it, the real Jeffersonian view of the president and war powers under the Constitution is not, oh, the executive branch could do whatever they want because Jefferson was able to do it and he didn't even care about going to Congress for anything. That's just a total lie. What it is, there's 3 points that we posted on X. This will be linked to in the show notes as well. 1, Congress exclusively, that was Jefferson's word, Congress exclusively makes the decision of whether or not the country will engage in war, not the president. The president, too, can use the military to respond to attacks, but cannot go beyond a very strict line of defense. And we see an example of what they considered the line of defense at Tripoli. 3, even if a war is declared by a nation against the United States, the president can still not go beyond the line of defense and must get authorization from Congress to engage in measures of offense.
Well, we covered the war for a number of years. We covered it closely when the Saudis were attacking Yemen, and it was a horrible war. But you had, at the end of the day, the Saudis had the latest American equipment. They spent a fortune on it, yet they lost to this, quote, ragtag army, the Houthis. They lost. They sued for peace. There was a peace. So the idea that the Saudis could not defeat the Houthis now has been lost on the Biden administration because they have, I would argue, and many others have argued, they've fallen into a trap. They believe that they will de-escalate in the region by attacking the Houthis, when in fact many people argue that that's exactly what the Houthis wanted. They wanted the U.S. to attack. And here's a great article. Bernard at the Moon of Alabama has a great piece that I definitely recommend, moonofalabama.com. I took out a couple of excerpts where Bernard quoted, in this first quote, if you can put it up, this is from the New York Times, and I think it's making a very good argument. He said, analysts who study the Houthis, I'll go back one if you can. Analysts who studied the Houthis said that the American-led airstrikes could play into the group's agenda and might be unlikely to stop the group's attacks. Well, we'll follow up on that in a second. And this is a senior research official at the ARCA group. This was not a miscalculation by the Houthis, said Hannah Porter, a senior researcher. This was their goal. They hope to see an expanded regional war, and they're eager to be on the front lines of this war. End quote. And it goes on, the New York Times goes on to say, within hours of the first wave of strikes, a senior Houthi official, Mohammed al-Bukhaiti, said that the United States and Britain would soon realize they had engaged in the biggest folly of their history. I would say this Houthi spokesman is probably right. If you go to the next one, he's quoting, Bernard is quoting further in this piece, a Laurent Bonnefoy, a researcher who studies Yemen at Sciences Po in Paris, said the Houthis, this is the strike that they were looking for. And this is a quote from this expert. They're gaining what they want, which is to appear the boldest regional player when it comes to confronting international coalition. And there's a lot here to read, and if you want to read it, you probably should. But to summarize it, Dr. Paul, Biden, in attacking the Houthis, he didn't do significant damage because they don't have a military base. They don't have a Pentagon there in Sana'a where you can hit. They have caves, they have tunnels, they have weapons that are smuggled in, they have a capacity of shutting down that strait. They gave the Houthis exactly what they wanted, which is to turn them into a major player and the only country that has really stepped up physically to challenge the Israeli attack on Gaza. So he played right into their hands.
You know, this is not isolated. This is not a new invention of our foreign policy. Because I was just thinking as we were talking here that, you know, the Houthi thing is designed and broadcast is going to do certain things and ends up doing the opposite or no good at all anyway. But are things much better in Ukraine? I mean, you could a lot of the conditions that you just described, you could apply to Ukraine. How many times have we bombed them? How much? There's even more money in lives. Just think of the lives lost up there. But what about the Palestinian-Israeli war going on? And we can't duck the responsibility there either. But we're participants. We promote this because that's the job of an empire, and that's why, you know, in many ways people think this is un-American, but I feel very comfortable with it. I do not think the American empire has anything to do with protecting personal liberty and making us a better country.
And it's a trap. Right now, there's nothing Biden can do. He was talked into, I don't know, Austin from his hospital bed somehow pushing buttons. He was talked into, let's send some missiles over to the Houthis and let's bomb them and they'll back down. Well, they haven't backed. They didn't back down against the Saudis. They're not going to back down. So the only thing, there are two choices left for Biden. He can say, well, that didn't work, too bad. Or he can escalate. And that's exactly what the Israelis want, of course, because and we'll talk about this later, they want to make this America's war. But it's also what the Houthis want. And I think it was in the Moon of Alabama article where Bernard pointed out that, after this peace with Saudi Arabia recently and this sort of a little bit of peace in the region, well, it was a little bit of a problem in Yemen because the Al-Ansar coalition that was running Yemen, I probably mispronounced that, but led by the Houthis, they were having a hard time delivering the goods. Their popularity was waning. People were frustrated. They've been through a bunch of war. Things weren't improving on the economy. They were getting more unpopular. Now, all of a sudden, they were attacked by the biggest power on earth, and they withstood it. The popularity shot straight up. The day the U.S. bombed them, they had 1 million people in the Capitol demonstrating. All of a sudden, everyone's saying, Viva Houthis, they love them. So it served the purpose of the Houthis in Yemen. It served Israel's purpose. The only people whose purpose it did not serve was the American people, right?
That's right. I think the expression that we get from our president is amazing. It's sort of an expression of total unawareness of you hear the words, you hear the intent, but all I see is the confusion that his mind isn't connecting with reality, and there's a staring. But I get to thinking that he's been around. I think he's been in Washington maybe 50 years plus, and it's almost like the brain starts working differently. Because you can't self-deceive oneself. A lot of people do that in a small sort of way, and they're deceived into thinking, if I only do this, it's going to work out. But that's trial and error of human nature. You try something, and I thought it was going to work, but you sort of laugh about it, kick yourself, or you change tune. But this is something different now. It's just this there's an attitude that that this is not that serious. This whole idea that I'm behind on the polls. No, that's not true. I mean, the polls have been wrong before, and it's oblivion. But I don't worry about it, because I think that I try to prepare people and tell them there's an alternative, because eventually the truth comes out, and it leaks out now. I think that's one of the reasons. As the economy deteriorates and the foreign policy deteriorates, the popularity of the president goes down. But it is a system that when the truth comes out, and I think that is what's happening, and that's why we do have bits and spurts of people supporting our position of saying, it's time we just minded our own business. Let people spend their money, and let the government just forget about the government spending our money, and we would be better off. The world would be better off too, because we wouldn't be fighting these wars.